Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another video for Final Fantasy XIV. This time another news video and an interview in particular that we're going to be reading through. I take no credit for this in particular. This is on the Square Enix official website, and you might want to check this out yourself, read it in your own time if that's the case. There's a link in the description of this video, like there always is for these types of videos. So this is actually an interview with the Final Fantasy XIV localization team, like an in-house interview, and it's part one. So there'll be another part to this in the future that we'll definitely look at. Let's just bring up the fact that the banner art on this website is absolutely fantastic. I'm just in love with this perfectly, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, let's have a look at this then. So the people that they're interviewing are Catherine, I'm going to butcher names here, Quinar, which is the law consultation and English translator, Pierre Pasquier, which is a French translator, David Furman, German translator, and Maki Shiota, localization project manager. I do apologize if I butchered those names. I always do. But essentially, they answer the same question that are given out, usually 3 or 4 of them. And yeah, so let's go through this. So what makes localizing an online multiplayer title like 14 different from titles that offer purely single-player experiences? Also, approximately how many people are involved in 14's localization? Very good, interesting question, this one. So first of all, we have the German lead here. David says, online games evolve over many years, continuously expanding both story and lore. With each update, new content and systems are added, and the project becomes more complex. This is both exciting and daunting at the same time, as your work defines how the players perceive this evolving world in many ways, from the dramatic encounter between mortal enemies to the naming of an inn or an area. Secondly, we aren't just dealing with a single protagonist, but with millions. For each and every player, the story is designed to make them feel unique and central in saving the world. While it is not always easy to portray the content as an organic team effort between several protagonists instead of a single hero or heroine, I think 14 is doing very well in keeping this feeling of being unique for each and every player throughout the main story and intertwining most other content with it. Marquis says, for English, German, and French, we currently maintain a team of 5 to 6 translators per language. We also borrow additional help in particularly busy periods during the development of the expansion pack, for example. As for what makes 14 team different from what we have on other projects, lots of things. But what stands out most is how much a team it is. He laughs. The nature of the project means that everyone, including localization, QA, and sound department members, have been working together since A Realm Reborn at least, so we're all very close. On any other project, he continues, the localization staff would be involved for 2 or 3 years at most before moving on to other things, but on 14, a lot of our members have been on the project for like a decade. We also have a lot of little get-togethers to celebrate the completion of each patch, or we did before the pandemic anyway. So we know each other pretty well. I doubt any other team can beat us on that score. Not that it's a competition, right? And Kate says, as mentioned above, 14 in particular is a team effort of the sort that's incredibly rare in Japanese games localization, so it would be hard to really put a number to the people involved in this aspect of the project. We translators are very fortunate to have an ongoing dialogue with the developers regarding the lore, UI, cutscenes, and more. This allows us to spot potential localization pitfalls, but also helps us have a more sound understanding of what we're translating, and allows the developer team to ask us questions in turn. So that's interesting then. So there's quite a lot of people then, all the way since A Realm Reborn. It's nuts to think, isn't it? A decade of the same team working on localization. I suppose it's how you keep the standards the same, isn't it, really? And you grow as you get closer. Interesting. Next question. So the Final Fantasy XIV localization team works very closely with the development team. Could you tell us how that dynamic works in a little more detail? Kate goes first, which is head of lore in the English. The main teams we end up working with directly here in Japan are the event team, who are responsible for lore and story, and the cutscene team. I work with the former frequently on lore and naming checks. This involves a lot of them sending really large files to comment on, and also more casual back and forths via Messenger where we ask questions, discuss ideas, or lament the fact that there are so many fire attacks because we're really running out of synonyms. That's pretty good, actually. When it comes time to translate and record the voice scenes for main scenario, representatives from each language usually meet with the writer in charge about how long it will take to act out the lines that need to be synchronized to animations, to see if we need to adjust the script or performance in order for all languages to take roughly the same amount of time. That's something you don't instantly think about, is it? Really. In the old Final Fantasy games, you have to remember that playing on certain difficulties, I remember that, certain languages, rather, would be faster than other languages. Japanese used to be a lot faster, didn't it? Talking from a speedrunning perspective, a lot of speedrunners today who play old games, they set, or if they can't set the language, they buy a Japanese version of a game because it's faster to run through, because there are less characters on screen. So, yeah, it's worth mentioning that they're working hard to make the animations, work, and all the cutscenes the same sort of time frame. That must be quite hard. Continuing then, also, are there ever situations where the 14 localization team gives ideas to developers instead of localizing game content that's already been created? David takes this first. He says, the English team is actively involved in naming of skills and location names, etc., and the wider localization team is invited to provide areas and concepts for new creatures from their various cultures. Then there are situations where we do culture checks and flag potential issues in a story to avoid misunderstandings or to cater to contemporary cultural developments. Kate says, I do often provide ideas for names we could use for in-game terms, bosses, attacks, NPCs, places, titles, and things like that based on parameters from the team. I'm not sure how much people actually notice that stuff, but I'm always happy when my ideas get used, like, yay, I'm helping. I have quite a lot of control then over the naming. Interesting. Now that we have an idea of a localization team's workflow, we'd like to ask some questions pertaining specifically to the game itself. Even just the descriptions of character creation of options such as race, job, and patron deity contain a vast amount of terms unique to 14 lore. What challenges are presented in localizing a title with such an expansive universe? Pierre takes this first. Nowadays, I would say consistency. I don't think there's anyone on the planet that can hold all the lore of 14 in their head, so we always have to check everything we write or translate regarding that. Working on a game that has been going on for such a long time also means that maintaining old text becomes more and more difficult and time-consuming. David says, ensuring consistency throughout the lore and existing content is one measurement of quality in our translations. Of course, a translator's experience is also very important. It can take years to get a grasp of the whole 14 world. So it is so vast. Oh, as it is so vast. Sorry, my reading's terrible. We also cross-check each other's work, while our editors and a full-fledged QA team are also on the lookout for potential issues. Kate says, we kind of have trouble hiring new translators or getting help on the project because there are few translators who have the ability and willingness to imitate the style of the English along with the intimate knowledge of 14 that is required to work on the game at this point. Play 7+ years of MMO content and memorize everything, thanks. Oh, and hurry up, we're on a deadline, is probably not something one wants to hear on their first day of work. On the development side, there is a lot of back and forth between Japanese lore folks and the localization team, as well as within our own team, when establishing those unique terms, because when we decide something, it will keep cropping up forever, to our eternal regret if we get it wrong. That's a good point, isn't it? So I guess hiring for that is a real problem, isn't it? How you would even become somebody on their team is beyond me, but I don't know. I think there are some people who could probably get it right, especially some of the people in our community. Like Ethis could probably pull that off quite easily. He's got the entire Encyclopedia Eorzea in his head. I'm pretty sure he's a very, very knowledgeable lore nerd at the end of the day. I love his stuff. I really do. So continuing, 14 often has collaboration events with other games and series. Does localization for those content differ from purely 14 content? This is an interesting question. And we've got a picture here of Veneer stuff, and we've also got 15. So Pierre says, we have to use a specific glossary for the other game elements, like skills, place names, and more. Also, the person in charge needs to know a thing or two about the other game. You couldn't ask someone who's never played a Nier game to translate something based on Yoko Taro's work, for instance. Then we have to be careful when we try to, when two very different worlds collide, like with 14 and 15. That's true. I suppose that's a lot of extra work, isn't it? You mentioned how 14's regular patches and new content make its localization unique. Can you tell us about that in a little more detail? Are there any special steps taken to increase localization efficiency so as to keep up with 14's update schedule? David says the basic localization workflow is always the same. Familiarize, translate, edit, quality assurance. That process is basically put into an endless cycle. Kate says, and despite all of the planning and everyone's best efforts, being involved in the lore development process with our cyclical schedule often results in a lot of spinning plates, at least for me, since we do field a considerable amount of requests outside of the game text itself, patch titles, stuff for the lodestone, lore books, and liner notes and merch names, oh my. We really have the ability to schedule in advance and have everything go to plan. We just try to roll with the punches. Next up he says, if you have played other main series Final Fantasy titles, 1 through 15, is there anything you've noticed while playing that piqued your interest, or that you've ended up using your work localizing 14? Pierre says some older translations are quite famous, so we do sometimes place a reference to them here and there, though never at the expense of the story, of course. Kate says, the Japanese side does a lot of work incorporating references from other Final Fantasy titles into 14 in a variety of ways, and we keep those references intact as much as possible in the localized versions, so there is not a lot of need for us to borrow further specific bits from those games. It's also dangerous in the event that the writers decide to reference that same stuff later. In terms of less specific things like the overall localization style, as in any type of writing, each translator's style is going to be influenced by what they've picked up across the years reading other translations and materials written in their target language, along with their personality and taste. In our case, our individual styles are also adjusted to be consistent with the overall style of 14, so there isn't a lot of room to take specific inspiration from other games, but their influence is probably in our work somewhere. Very interesting. Next is 14 also allows people who don't speak mutual languages to play together, including tools such as set phrases that can be automatically translated into other languages and sent to chat. Does an MMORPG with such a diverse player base present any unique challenges compared to one that's only played in one language? What special steps are taken to accommodate for that kind of community? And we've got a couple of pictures here of the autocorrect system, which you've no doubt seen in the game, which translates that auto-translate stuff. Very useful, especially if you're playing with other people, especially on Europe servers. Probably less so on America, but there we go. Pierre says, like you say, there's this tool of set phrases in the game that helps a lot. Apart from that, we try to be more conservative when translating system-related text, like actions, tools, or interface names. David says for specific content like raids, we sometimes work closely with the other languages to make sure that our translations don't differ too much. Most people are probably defaulting to English when teaming up, so German tends to look closely at the English terms when it comes to specific mechanics that are key to win. While the meaning will be mostly the same in all three languages, the way the meaning is conveyed might largely differ, as Japanese is not a language that you can always transport one-to-one in a Latin language. Furthermore, we try to work very creatively with the language, and sometimes that means diverging from the source text to highlight a specific aspect of characterization or story element better for our target audience. That's a really valid point, actually. I remember there was some confusion with larboard and starboard, wasn't there? If you remember back to that particular fight, and the translation was completely different for others. And yeah, there was a lot of confusion. So I suppose it's really all about trying to minimize those impacts. Very interesting, though. It's not something you immediately think of, is it? Next up, it says 14 has a very passionate fan base both in Japan and around the world. Continuing with the previous question's theme, as a title aimed at global audiences, is 14's localization less challenging than any other titles in any other way? Kate says, equivalent player experience and the development team's awareness of the global nature of this game are certainly a huge help. Prominent figures on the project, like producer and director Yoshida-san and world lore creator / main scenario writer Oda-san, have a much more solid understanding of the mechanics, potential, and value of localization than most people in the industry, and trust in our ability to do our jobs. We're not put in a position of delivering work that we know is going to disappoint English speakers, because if there is anything that really will not translate well, we can always consult with the developers about changing it in one or all languages. The popularity of the game in English markets is a testament to the fact that this way of operating is good for players too. Pierre says, since the game is in a constant development and transition, constant development and translation, we can always suggest changes when we find something that could be improved. And since the next patch is always around the corner, we can fix old mistakes when we, or our devoted fans on the forums, find one. Those millions of pairs of eyes certainly help. So that was the end of part 1 of those interviews with the localization team. I didn't immediately think this was necessarily going to be filled with information that would be interesting to me, but overall, I'm very impressed, and I would love to see the second part of this, so we will do a video on that as well next week, I believe. But yeah, very, very cool. They're very passionate about their work, and it's interesting to see behind the scenes of how difficult it would be to get a job as a writer, unless you probably have been a player of the game. But when you've got 20 million people plus registered people playing the game, I'm sure that there are quite a lot of people they could hire from playing the game itself, and that's probably where I would look for employment. But if I was them, I'd definitely field it to the actual players of the game themselves. I suppose it really is more of a passion project than anything else, isn't it, really? But yeah, this was a fantastic set of interviews. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but this was certainly up my alley. And I was very interested to see how they approach things and attack various problems within their day, really, in their workflow. But you really do forget how much localization itself impacts the game. And I used an example earlier of, boss mechanics, basically, how different those could be based on a translation and how close they have to work. So there's many, many, many people to do with this game, localization-wise, and it's in so many different languages that they really have their work cut out, so hopefully they're paid well, because they deserve it. Anyway, if you want to go and look at this interview yourself, or check this portal site out yourself, a link will be once again in the description of the video. I always advise you to go and give love to the articles, and this one is no different. Thank you so much to Square Enix for posting this insight. It's very nice. And hopefully next week we can do it again. Much love, guys. Let me know what you think about this. Whether you would want to become a member of a localization team yourself in the future. Best of luck if you do. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.